And then, like I said, yeah, a lot of the fitness benefits will last indefinitely. But like say the top guys like in our group, and to be honest, at the very top level internationally, pretty much all distance athletes are going to altitude at least 3, if not 4 times a year. So I mean, that tells you all you need to know in terms of the benefits of it.
Like, I'm sure there's places in Ireland, so I don't want to badmouth or anything like that, but that have like their chambers for like kind of mimicking this, but like a one-off thing. Or it used to be a phase where you had, I like remember the Rocky movies, the Creed one, they had the mask and stuff. That seems to have gone now. The mask that for, I think, was to mimic kind of altitude training. I could be wrong on that, or mimic harder breathing. Like, does that work at all? Or is the reason that mask is gone? Or like, you need to be in that same spot for 3 weeks to get benefits?
So there's still people that would use the altitude tents, and there in some places there's altitude houses. So I know there was one in Limerick in UL for quite a few years. Colin Griffin was behind that. So basically that was the house was fully sealed up, and they just altered the oxygen levels in the house to mimic 2,500 meters above sea level. So that is quite good. And likewise, the altitude tent is something you kind of goes around your bed, and you sleep in that for 8 or 9 hours at night. But the big advantage you have at altitude, it's not necessarily the training there, it's the fact you're in that environment for 24 hours a day. Whereas if you're in an altitude house or in your tent, you're doing well to get 10 or 12 hours. So even with best efforts, you're only getting half the exposure that you would when you're actually at altitude. So I actually had one of the tents for a couple of years. And yeah, there is a bit of a kick off it, but it's absolutely not comparable to what you get by actually going to altitude.
Remind me never to go camping with you, Emmett. It
was known as the passion killer.
Difference between Limerick and Kenya.
Significant is the answer. I lived in London for a while in Teddington, and there was a house where it was actually just a lot of athletes. We lived in Teddington, and if you've ever been to Teddington, it's like the place where most of the international athletes would base themselves when they're in the UK or in Europe. So like it was like the who's who of world athletics. But the house we were in was quite big. There was 4 altitude tents in it. Each tent had a generator. It was humming like an airport every night around 8 o'clock to get the altitude. The noise, because everyone who didn't have one had to wear earplugs, because of the 4 lads that had altitude tents and that had the generators out in the hall.
It's amazing to see the science that's going into the runs that you're getting. Like you're saying, top athletes, and I follow a lot of the triathletes as well. They're all going to these camps, training camps up in the Alps, and they're living there. Essentially, they're packing the van, they're gone for 6 weeks. Big training block leading into races. How important, particularly with you scheduling, coaching, how important is getting the balance right? How do you maximize that? I know you've said the fitness lasts, but how do you maximize that to get the advantage? Because that's why we do this. That's why me and Sean are going to Kenya with you next January, is to get the advantage. But how do you manage that? And I suppose that is the question. How do you manage that? How do you factor that into a race season?
Yeah, so I guess ultimately when you're planning out a season, particularly for high-end athletes, you're looking, first of all, is pick your target race. Okay, so that might be World Championships, European Championships, and then you work back from there. Ideally, I would get most athletes to come down from altitude a minimum of 2 weeks, but ideally maybe 3 to 4 weeks before their target race. And then you're working back from that. So if you want to do a 4-week camp, obviously that's got to start 8 to 9 weeks before that target race. The key with altitude is you're getting most of the benefit from just being there. But when you're in an environment where you're surrounded by top class athletes, everybody has nothing to do except train. It's very easy to get carried away and do too much. And that's where I suppose as a coach, I try and get myself to Kenya for the first 2 weeks of the camp, monitor everything in terms of taking heart rates and lactates. So like at the end of the first week, we all went to the track. We done like 5x2K or 6x2K, and I was taking lactates. And basically you're calibrating your training paces off that for the next couple of weeks. And the main reason we do that is because it's so different to sea level. Like you're probably running 30 seconds per mile. So that's what, 20 seconds per kilometer slower at altitude than you would at sea level.